Hi, Sandy. How are you? Good. I like your shirt. It's a good one. I've never seen that. It's very clever. Very clever. Yeah.
Yeah, and perfect for today.
Yeah.
Right. Boker Tov, it's great to see everyone. Good morning. Right, so the teacher in me is like, cut the when I'm talking, no one else is talking. So we have to quiet down here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for moving into the sanctuary. We hope all of our streaming audience is coming in as we stream. And just a few announcements. July 7th, Rabbi Serrata will be here. Same situation. And he'll be talking about a theology for a troubled time. I memorized that. I think our speaker today, Rabbi Evan Moffic, needs no introduction, which does not preclude me from giving an introduction. And he is the rabbi at Makom Solel Lakeside, and he came to Solel. And I just read, you were 31. Wow. Well, listen, what's happening in anti-Semitism could age anyone. So he's going to speak to us. We'll have time for questions when he's finished. So with no further ado, let's give a hand to Rabbi Evan.
Well, it's nice to see everybody. What a beautiful day we have. And so thank you for coming in. And this is a tough topic. And some of you may know I wrote a book about anti-Semitism that was released in 2018, 2019. And I could go back through the book, but I actually think things have changed so much even since then. And so I tend not to like to look at notes when I do a sermon or even a lecture. I just kind of but with this, I really tried to think through kind of what is going on now and what do we need to look at and understand. So forgive me if I look down at my iPad a good deal, because I really thought through and tried to develop some new ideas for today. But first, let's start with a joke. It's a classic, well, you might have heard it before, but this joke kind of gives us a little perspective on anti-Semitism. So let's go back to Russia, Ukraine, someplace a few hundred years ago. Two Jewish guys are walking by a church, and there's a sign outside the church that says, "Come in and convert today, and we'll give you 50 rubles." And so one of the guys looks to the other guy and says, "You know what? I think I'm going to do it. I could use the money. I think I'm going to do it." The other guy says, "Really? You're going to do it?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm going to go do it." So guy goes into the church, comes out about an hour later, and says, "I did it." And his friend says, "Really? You did it? You say, "Yeah, I did it." And then the friend goes, "Well, did they give you the 50 rubles?" And the guy says, "Is that all you Jews think about?" So the point of this joke is that somehow we all look at the world through filters. It's a kind of a bias, it's a stereotype that we look at things in certain ways, and those then govern how we look at others. It's a way of simplifying life. Now let me give you another contemporary example of essentially this same joke. The writer Dara Horn was speaking on a college campus. You know, Dara Horn's an amazing writer, and she's been writing a lot about anti-Semitism. So she's speaking at a college campus just a couple of months ago about anti-Semitism. And one of the administrators, a dean, so this is not just some radical student, this is a well-paid, probably has a PhD leader in the school, and says, well, are you going to talk about Jewish power at all? And Dara Horn says, I don't quite understand what you're saying. What do you mean by Jewish power? She says, well, all these Jews who are withholding donations from universities because they don't like the Israel policy. And Dara Horn said, well, that's simply called what donors do to any organization. Donors give to organizations they support and care about, and donors don't give to organizations that are doing things they don't support and care about. That's not a Jewish issue, that's a donor issue. And maybe even some of you saw it as a Jewish power issue too. We do see the world through certain lenses. Jews aren't the only donors that withhold for certain reasons. And so there are stereotypes that govern the way we look at things. Another example, people talk about the war in Iraq and Jewish, neoconservatives. This is a big, I mean, even, there are a lot of people on the right who say, well, the people who led us into the Iraq war were Jewish neoconservatives, Paul Wolfowitz, David Frum, and I said, well, Condoleezza Rice, George W. Bush, these aren't Jews. These are people of other ethnicities. Why are you focusing on the Jews? But this happens. We get certain things in our mind. And the way we look at the world, we always oversimplify things. Always. That's just how our brain saves energy. We have to. Biases are normal, and you can't overcome all biases. But there are certain biases towards Jews that are very, very powerful. Now, the question then is, where do these biases come from? And that's a big, interesting historical question. But before I get to that, I just want to say, really, I think what October 7th did is it reminded us how persistent these biases are. Many people, including myself, I remember when I was a young rabbi, even before age 31, when I came here. This was back when I was in the city, and I led a film group at the synagogue at Chicago Sinai, where I was. And one time we watched a film about anti-Semitism. This must have been about 2007. It must have been 2007. And we were having this discussion on anti-Semitism. And it was a mostly older crowd. And I kind of said, well, really, truthfully, anti-Semitism is on the decline. It's not a big issue anymore. I didn't become a rabbi to talk about the Holocaust and being a victim. I became a rabbi to, celebrate Jewish joy and positivity. I mean, I didn't say it in such stark terms, but that was essentially the message. I said, really, anti-Semitism was an issue, but it's no longer the center of the Jewish agenda. And this was not an uncommon point of view. This was what even if you look at major Jewish organizations in the late 1990s saying, well, we have to start talking less about anti-Semitism and start talking about positive Jewish things. Because America, anti-Semitism is on the decline everywhere. And that basically was the vision that I kind of had as a rabbi for a long time. I'd say the first cracks in that vision started happening maybe in 2008, 2009, where you had, the Great Recession was horrible, and you started to see some anti-Semitism creep up online. But it really, I would say, the key turning point, it was already starting to happen even before 2006, 2007. But I'd say the real evidence where people started to wake up was about 2015, during the election campaign, and you started to see the alt-right. And then you started to see, so you saw the alt-right, which were these sort of very vocal online anti-Semites blaming Jews for everything from the Iraq War to the Great Recession to, ballooning our national debt by giving money to Israel, even though, all the aid to Israel essentially comes back to the United States because it's used to purchase weapons from the United States, from Lockheed Martin and so forth. So it's not really aid. That's a whole nother discussion. But so anyways, that really became vocal in 2015 and 2016. And you had it at the same time from the right and the left. So essentially, and then October 7th brought it to a new level. So essentially, my own view of the rabbinate in the Jewish community in America has shifted because it's a whole different set of challenges. So we're going to get to college campuses too, and we're going to get to a few things. But first, where does anti-Semitism come from? Where do these biases come from? Now, again, you can't answer this precisely. You can't answer it like 2 + 2 = 4. It's not an exact answer. But a first thing to understand about Judaism and anti-Semitism is that I think anti-Semitism begins in fear of the other. Fear of the other is part of human nature, right? We are tribal creatures. I mean, even today, even if somebody were to walk in right now even and looked unfamiliar, we didn't know who that person was, maybe they were a different skin color than most of us, we would try to overcome some of our stereotypical influences, but it's just that is how we operate. So fear of the other or a concern about the other, may not always be fear, it depends on the context, but concern about the other, about people who are different, is part of human nature, and we tend to associate with people who are like us. That's true. Look, I've married hundreds and hundreds of couples, and I can tell you, generally, when people come from similar backgrounds, it is better. Or it is longer lasting. It is easier, maybe is the even better word. Not that it's diversity is wonderful, but we generally, as part of human nature, we generally are more comfortable with people who are like us. And the truth is, throughout history, Jews have represented difference. They were different than the norm and celebrated. This goes back to, not even before Christianity, this goes back to ancient Greece, where Jews were criticized because why do they rest on the Sabbath? The Jews were outsiders. Even going back to Egypt, this people is too numerous. So Jews were the original diversity in culture, DEI. Jews were different, and so that even going back to the ancient Near East, where Jews originated from, they were tribal. The sites that were known as, and we weren't even called Jews then; we were called Hebrews. The site where Hebrews were compared to other ancient Near Eastern groups, there are no pig bones that are found. The archaeologists have found pig bones at certain sites in the Near East, but ones that were known to be the sites of Hebrews, there's no pig bones. So we already were eating differently than others. So Jews have always represented difference, and that goes from the Greek Empire to Christianity to the Roman Empire to the Islamic Empire to medieval Spain to modern Europe. So this constantly being different. Now, here's the interesting thing. You can be different and escape hatred if you're small enough. Look at the Amish today. The Amish are very, very different than most anybody, especially in America and in other places. But the Amish are so small that it's sort of a essentially meaningless difference. They make good furniture, and you can go and have a nice time in an Amish small town. Okay, that's about it. So in order to sort of be a victim, you have to be different, but you also have to be successful and numerous enough to get attention. And obviously, Jews have been disproportionately successful in every culture in which we've existed. I mean, it's sort of everyone knows about the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize statistics. Jews are 0.02% of the world population, yet have won 25% of Nobel Prizes. We've heard that before. And by the way, this is not just a modern phenomenon. As I was researching, I read this story about, this is going back 1,000 years. There was a sultan, and he was sick. And it wasn't a sultan. Yeah, it was in Spain. It was a local king who was sick, and he only wanted to see a Jewish doctor. And he insisted, he actually even tested the doctor who came to him. He said to the doctor, this is documented, he said, why has the Messiah not come yet? And the doctor said, oh, I'm a converso. I converted, so the Messiah has come. And the local ruler said, I want a different doctor. And he went, by that time in this town, 50% of Jews were doctors. So this is not something new. So we have succeeded in every society. Now, why that success? That's a topic for a different lecture. I don't think it's genetic. I think it's cultural. But we can talk about that at a different time. So what that means is Jews are both subhuman and superhuman. Just think about this. This is subhuman. So vermin and also rulers of the world. This is what Hitler said. That's vermin who rule the world. Think about how paradoxical that is. Think about that. Jews are inferior, they killed Jesus, they suffer, because even though there were a lot of Jewish doctors, still, most Jews lived in poverty through most of history. We have to always understand that. There were exceptions in certain areas and so forth, but it wasn't always, there were definitely poor Jews throughout history. But especially today, Jews are seen as both, cosmopolitan, Western, look at how successful, and yet Jews are also awful and, they're parochial, they're tribal. So these paradoxical views can exist at the same time. So Jews are both a very small people who are different and we can pick on them, but Jews are also so powerful and superhuman. Again, it's a paradox. So this point of view now I talked about how October 7th kind of supercharged modern anti-Semitism. Well, it's sad to say, but Christianity supercharged this earlier anti-Semitism. So Jews were always different, going back to ancient Egypt. Jews were always different. But when Christianity comes to power, that brings this sort of view of Jews as different and wicked into the wider world. Now, by the way, that's not true today. One of the great miracles of the 20th and 21st century is sort of reconciliation between Jews and Christians. But why does Christianity have such a classical Christianity have such a negative view of Jews? Well, there are two things. But first, it starts as a family quarrel. Think about it. The first Christians are all Jews. They're Jewish followers of Jesus. And anybody who has friends and family, how awful family quarrels can be. People don't talk to each other for decades, and family quarrels can be awful and really visceral. So think about that just on a wider scale. But even more so, Christianity develops a theology that essentially mandates hatred of Jews. So why is this? Well, think about it. Jews were the original followers of Jesus, and so if Jews have not accepted Jesus as God, they're either one, wicked, because they don't want to accept God, so they must be Satan. And this is very common. So if you're denying the reality of God and God was right in front of you, you must be a truly awful person. So they're either wicked or they're blind. And blind is, maybe we have a little sympathy for them, but they're going to suffer because they're blind. They don't see the truth in front of them. So from a Christian theology point of view, Jews are either wicked or blind. And it oscillates. In some eras, like when St. Augustine, for Christians, he's a very, very important Christian saint, he basically said Jews are wicked, and as a result of that wickedness, they have to suffer. And then there were other times where it was saying, well, Jews are truly blind and they have to suffer, but they're useful in our society, so we'll kind of tolerate them, but they can never become, they can never be equals to Christians. So Christianity kind of mandates this anti-Semitism. Again, that's changed. But the effect of that is tremendous because Western culture, the culture in which we live, is built on Christianity. Now, that's been declining enormously. The role of religion in public life has dramatically declined over the last several decades. But it would be foolhardy. I mean, our whole Western culture is built on, people politely call it Judeo-Christian culture, but it's really Christian culture. I mean, even, the Bible, we have many phrases we use in life that an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. These are common phrases that all come out of the Bible. So Western culture is essentially built on Christianity, which is rooted in anti-Semitism. So this is why it's so persistent. This is why it governs the way we look at the world. By the way, someone who wrote a book on this is someone named Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, who wrote the book. Hitler's Willing Executioners. Must be out of batteries.
Shocking.
Yeah, Hitler's Willing Executioners. And this book his idea was that people in Germany and Europe essentially just had to be, it was like a light switch, that the Jew hatred was always there, and all it needed was somebody to ignite it. Now, why was it always there? Well, it was imbibed with mother's milk, that you were raised with the idea that Jews killed Jesus, Jews are wicked, so all you have to do is remind people of that, and boom. So, not everyone agreed with that thesis, but it seems pretty powerful. Now, by the way, I'm going to talk about college campuses in a minute, but here's something kind of related that's sad. One of the reasons that college campuses have become more hostile to Jews and Judaism over the last 20 years, really, because I graduated college in 2000. I can tell you there was virtually no anti-Semitism. I mean, maybe there was that I didn't see it, but I really do believe there was. The Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, spoke on campus because he got his master's degree at Stanford. There were no protests. Zero. There were no he was celebrated. But what's happened over the last 20 years, and I kind of feel bad saying this because it kind of sounds a little bit biased, but there's been a huge increase in students from the Middle East who are on college campuses. That's documented. And there's been huge infusions of money from Middle Eastern governments to college campuses, including Harvard, Georgetown, Penn, Stanford. I mean, massive amounts of money. If you think Jewish donors give a lot of money, this makes that look like pennies. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that changes, and there's no denying this. In many Arab countries, anti-Semitism is a part of the curriculum from childhood. I mean, that includes a place like Egypt, which has a peace treaty with Israel. And Israelis travel to Egypt. There's nothing. Egypt. I would travel to Egypt. I'd feel perfectly comfortable. But anti-Semitism is taught in schools. The protocols of the Elders of Zion can be bought at a bookstore. I mean, so if people are raised with this kind of point of view, that ultimately affects how you look at the world. Not that people can't change. People can certainly change, and I hope college at its best makes us more open-minded. But this has happened. So, okay. Let's talk about college campuses for a little bit now, too. One thing people always ask me, and I bet this is something that's on your mind, too, is if you see protests today about what's going on in Israel and Hamas and Gaza, you sometimes see LGBTQ for Palestine or queers for Gaza. You see that a lot. Now, obviously, as many of you know, LGBTQ family members, and this is my wife is really a major advocate and involved in the community, and this is very painful to see that. So I really wanted to understand, how does this happen? And I've come to a conclusion. Some people just say, well, these people are just so dumb. I don't think that's true. I don't think that queers for Palestine or LGBTQ, I don't think, these are not dumb people. These are generally pretty smart people. But it's politics, and it's a way of looking at the world that you people create political alliances often based on a common villain. Think about this. 21 Arab nations that have often been at war with one another, Sunni and Shia, they're 21 Arab nations. What do they all have in common over the past 50 years? They've hated Israel. Now, many of these Arab countries hate each other. Yet, when you have a common enemy, it brings people together. So then you ask this question, well, why would people in a sort of marginalized community like LGBTQ, how could they ally with people, especially on, let's say, the far left, who are sympathetic to their cause, so the far left and LGBTQ, but they can even draw closer. They draw closer together by having a common villain. It's anti-Israel, and we would say anti-Semitism, because we're going to get to that too. But being anti-Israel can be a grand unifying cause. And by the way, this has happened throughout history. In the 19th century, one of the great political tools in Europe was anti-Semitism. So in the 19th century, if you've ever been to Vienna, there's a big statue of this guy. I'm blanking on his name now, but he was the mayor of Vienna in the late 19th century, and he was a very successful mayor. He built up Vienna into this great city. He was, he made major opera institutions. He was a very successful mayor. But he was a populist and a conservative, and he built his political coalition on anti-Semitism. So people who wouldn't have many commonalities could agree to hate Jews. Kind of like if you think of the South in the 19th century. Poor whites and rich plantation owners, they could come together because of a common enemy, blacks, right? I mean, this is classical politics. This is populist politics. So different groups come together based on hatred of Israel. So that is what I think is happening with the LGBTQ community. And it's not everywhere in the LGBTQ community, but it's a big prominent voice. So it's an alliance of convenience. These people know that they couldn't live in Gaza. And if you gave them the choice, you could either live in Gaza or Israel. I'm assuming 100% of them would say, I would rather live in Israel, because you die in Gaza. But for political purposes, it is convenient to have this common victim. Now, this actually brings me to another topic, and this is a really difficult, also complex topic, and that is why there is anti-Semitism from the left, the far left, and there's anti-Semitism from the far right. So what is the difference? What is the difference? This is a very interesting question. So let's start with the far right. This is kind of like David Duke, neo-Nazis, the people who marched in Charlottesville. This is a certain kind of anti-Semitism. This is an anti-Semitism, Lindbergh. We're kind of familiar with this. And these are people who just have a visceral hatred of the Jewish people. These are people who say, if they find out you're Jewish, they're not going to talk to you, they're going to shun you. Oh, you got a big nose. Oh, you're odd. This is sort of the people who just have a visceral hatred, basically for anyone who's different. And this is we're familiar with. This is sort of the, Aryans. Oh, they don't look like us. Oh, they're strange. So just knowing somebody is Jewish creates an antipathy towards that person. This is anti-Semitism from the right. On the left, it's not hatred of the Jewish people, because I would argue some of them are Jewish themselves. It's a hatred of the ideological construct of the Jew. The Jew represents capitalism. The Jew represents imperialism. The Jew represents the power of the white Western world. So these are people who, again, this has nothing to do with reality, by the way, because a Jewish guy didn't invent capitalism, but it is looking at Jews and Judaism as representative of systems of power and oppression that they oppose. And Jews provide a very convenient vehicle for this, because we can represent, David Wolpe said this beautifully, he's a rabbi, he said, whatever you want to hate, you can find something in the Jew that will allow you to hate. And this is interesting. So you can say Jews are too cosmopolitan, we're global, we live everywhere, or you could say Jews are too parochial, they're too tribal. You could say Jews are ultra-wealthy capitalists, or you could say Jews are all communist socialists. I mean, some of the most famous socialists were Jewish. You can say Jews represent power, or you could say Jews are always victims. So you can find anything you want to hate in this image of the Jew. And I think this is what has caught on at universities. College students, I don't think the protesters hate the Jewish people. I don't think they're right-wing David Duke types who hate Jews. That doesn't resonate with me. I would say probably in many ways you could have a I don't know about civil conversation, but they're not unreasonable, hateful bigots. That doesn't make sense. But these are people who believe that the world is filled with violence, war, oppression of women and minorities. They have very strong points of view. And the reigning left-wing ideology, progressive ideology, looks at the world through ideological constructs. And those ideological constructs are always based on power and race. Always power and race. Those are the two key things. So if you are in power, or you are white and Western, you are generally an oppressor. And if you are not, if you don't have power, and if you are a person of color, you are usually an oppressed, a victim. And that is a very, very powerful ideology, and it is really, truly a dominant one on many, not all, but many college campuses. So this then, Jews are often white, often wealthy, at least disproportionately, and in the case of Israel and Gaza, Israel is the more powerful party. There's no argument with that. Yes, they're not totally full. I mean, obviously 1,200 innocent people were killed on October 7th. But if you look, anybody who sees the world based on power differentials, you look at the world in Gaza and you automatically see Palestinians are the victims, Israelis are the oppressors. It's pretty simple. So then, if you care about war and oppression, you are going to protest. And that's then why there are Jewish protesters. There are many of the people who are in tents are Jewish. Now, this then brings us to a whole nother question. And this is a very interesting and a difficult one. And this is, are anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism the same thing? Because many protesters will say, I'm not anti-Semitic. I could be Jewish myself. I'm just opposed to the Jewish state. I'm opposed to Israel taking people's land that didn't belong to them, and they should be able to live with other people. So I'm anti-Zionist. I'm opposed to the Jewish state, but of course I'm not anti-Semitic. Is that possible? Well, I would say, in theory and generally, yes. It is very possible to be an anti-Zionist and to be Jewish. I mean, that was actually a prominent view in America for a certain period of time. You could be an anti-Zionist, but certainly you could also be Jewish. So that is, however, if you think of a Venn diagram today, the overlap between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is most of the circle. That it is very difficult today, if you honestly study anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, the overlap is tremendous. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is that Jews have lived in Israel now been a serious population center in Israel for decades and decades. So if you don't believe in a Jewish state, you're essentially putting the lives of 7 to 8 million Jews at risk. So, there's no other way to look at it. You could say maybe it was a travesty 80 years ago, but sometimes reality exerts itself, and there is a there is a substantial Jewish state with a Jewish population that is clearly under attack and threatened. Secondly, it's very hard to accept the idea that there should be 50 Muslim states and not one Jewish state. To me, I guess you could hold that point of view, but it's very difficult to defend it, especially knowing the history of the Jewish people. I mean, it's not just the Holocaust. It's the Crusades. It's going back to, the Inquisition. I mean, Jews have experienced hatred and anti-Semitism for so long. And while a Jewish state is not the solution to anti-Semitism, it is part of the solution. The ideal solution would be almost, in a sense, places like America. Yes, we have anti-Semitism, but we're also very diverse and different peoples exist, but that's not most of the world. So, again, I think in theory, and for some people, I do believe some people truly, authentically hold anti-Zionism views and are certainly not anti-Semitic. But I think that it is the overlap today, especially in the context in which we live, the two are often very close and similar. Some may disagree with me here, and that's fine. That's fine. Okay. A couple other things about college campuses. I think another reason we're seeing so much protest is that, and this is actually going to be somewhat blaming, the Jewish community has made a lot of mistakes. We also made a lot of mistakes. I think for many years, we gave younger people a view of Israel as kind of a Jewish Disneyland. That you go there, everything's wonderful, Jews drained the swamps and built great cities and great cultures, and it was a land with no people for a people without a land. That was the classic sign. And the truth is, that was not true. That's not true. Israel is not a perfect country, and it's bad, I think, to assume that it is, because younger people today truly value transparency. And there is a suspicion of institutions. There is a true, you're hiding something from me. So I think some people on college campuses are saying, this is why, and this is kind of a sad truth, many of the leaders of Jews who are protesting on college campuses, many of them went to Jewish day schools. A lot of them grew up conservative and went to Jewish day schools. My wife has worked with some of them. So they actually even work at Jewish organizations today. So these are people who are very much opposed to the existence of a Jewish state. they support boycott, divestment, sanctions, and they grew up going to Jewish day school. It's hard to believe that, isn't it, for this? But it's true. This is statistically. Now, how is that possible, you ask? Well, they feel they were given a distorted view of Israel. They were given this view that Israel is perfect and wonderful, and the Jewish army is a perfect army, and they never do anything wrong, and they're the most moral people in the world. And that's just not true. Israelis are human beings just like anyone else. Yes, there's some remarkable, miraculous thing. I would say there are miraculous things that have happened in Israel. And Israel truly, I do think, is a remarkable state. But there are problems there, just like there are problems anywhere. So I think younger people today feel, rightly or wrongly, it's probably, anyone who has kids know that they can exaggerate things sometimes, okay? But the idea is that they were given a false narrative about Israel. And so I think that is partially true, and I think it's better to just be transparent, to say, yeah, Israel is not a perfect place, but look at what's going on. It is not an easy place to live, and so Israel has to be a very strong military power in order to survive, and it has to have a power differential. So be real. And I think sometimes Jewish organizations weren't real. The other thing that we can do that I think is very important, so this is somewhat going into solutions to what we can do now. I think it's important to listen to the other side. You know, one time this was Legacy Solel, we had the president of J Street speak. I'm forgetting his name now. We had him speak here. And I got some flack from some of our congregants who are pretty major AIPAC supporters. And the reason, and we've had AIPAC here too. In fact, it's funny, I was once going through the archives of the synagogue, and Joe Biden spoke here in the 80s, brought here by AIPAC. Yeah, so he was a speaker at Legacy Solel, and he was brought here by AIPAC. It's in the old bulletin, so that was kind of interesting. But anyways, people on AIPAC will not serve on a panel with people from J Street and vice versa. Now, that's politics, but the idea, I think, is it's important to listen to the other side. Not that we have to agree at all, but do we ever change somebody's mind by telling them they're wrong and here's what you should believe? Never. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We change people's minds through calm listening and people coming to their own point of view. So I think it's important to listen. Now, it's also important to speak out in strong terms and to be proud of our point of view. That's another big problem on college campuses is Jewish students who are generally supportive of Israel have a fear of speaking out because they'll get condemned. They'll be isolated and marginalized. So we have to get over that fear, or have to encourage kids to get over that fear. Now, how does that happen? Well, I think that happens through education. That happens through going to Israel and visiting there. It's important to visit there. But we have to listen to the other side, but also speak with our convictions. And this is another somewhat positive thing that has happened since October 7th. I actually think many Jews are more comfortable being Jewish and being pro-Israel. That it's almost awakened a sense of Jewish peoplehood. People are wearing Jewish stars more. People are, in a sense, they've been ignited, awakened. Not true for everybody, but there is a greater feeling of connection, that we truly are one people. Doesn't matter if you're a billionaire in Manhattan or you are, a Jew in the middle of Idaho. It is feeling a connection with other Jews because of what happened on October 7th. So I think that's a positive. I hope it lasts. It's sad that a horrible event is something that brings us together, but that's human nature. So those are, I think, the best responses right now to the rise in anti-Semitism is listening, being proud of being Jewish, and also, here's something to always remember. Even though we see so much anti-Semitism, there are many, many people who are supportive of Jews and of Israel. In fact, it's the majority of Americans. And I don't know if it's not the majority of the world, but there are many, many people. David Wolpe talked about how he was riding in an Uber and his phone rang and it was an unlisted number and he's like, should I answer it? It's probably a spam call. But he answered it and it was Van Jones from CNN saying, I want to organize, I want, the Jewish community has always been there for the African American community. And now, after October 7th, I want to bring together the Jewish community and the African American community so we can be there for you. And he worked with Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook to create a huge event. Now, that's wonderful. And we should also appreciate, the vice president just had Sheryl Sandberg showing a video about rape of Israeli women at the White House. That's incredible. So Jews and Israel are loved in many different places. So we should celebrate that and remember that, and also thank people. Thanks for standing up for what's right. So there is a positive here. All right, I just covered a lot of ground, a lot of stuff about anti-Semitism, and I'm sure, wow, time flies by. Questions, comments, I would love to answer. Yeah, okay, yes. Go, Vanessa, you go ahead.
I got it. It's my exercise.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
How much do you think the isolation of the pandemic for these young people in high school, missing graduations, missing proms and stuff, now they've had a real bump in their lives, in their youth, and now there's a feeling of being part of a greater cause. How much do you think that might have contributed to what we see?
I think a big part of it. We all are looking for belonging. We all want to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. And when people get caught up in a great movement, even though they don't really... Somebody interviewed a few of the protesters who were yelling from the river to the sea, and they said, which river and which sea are you talking about? Something like 60% didn't know. So I think you're right. People get caught up in a movement, and it makes them feel good. It feels like we're making a difference. We're doing something important. And I do think that's a big part of it. And it is. It's sad. Because, it makes college campuses. I was talking with a guy who is a bond trader. He's a very successful guy. And he was telling me, he's like, he was looking at the universities as like paper, bond paper, and he said the value of the paper of Harvard and Columbia and Yale has diminished over the last couple years because of what's happened. I thought that was a good way of looking at it, because it actually hurts colleges and universities when such things happen. So I do think many of the kids, they may be smart, but yeah, there's a huge mental health crisis in our country, and it feels good to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Very much so. Okay, we got a lot of, good.
Yeah, this is going to complicate it a little bit more.
Sure.
But I believe Netanyahu's coming to speak in Congress this week, and I think he's made part of his political campaign that if you oppose me, you oppose Israel, and you're an anti-Semite. Care to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's a pure political ploy to come and speak to Congress. I think from I was reading some people who said he should not have accepted it. From his point of view, it's great. So I don't think the invitation should have ever been extended. I think from his point of view, of course he's going to accept it, because he's speaking before the U.S. Congress, a powerful body. It makes him look good in Israel and so forth. But it is more of a political ploy to create that perception that anyone who doesn't support me and stands up clapping is anti-Semitic. And most Americans are pro-Israel. So if you don't stand up and clap your Congress, then your constituents are going to say, well, you hate Israel, and you must. So it is a clever political ploy, but it's not, I don't think it's in Jews or Israel's best interest. That's my point of view. Yeah. Yeah.
Rabbi, how would you advise people on a personal basis when you hear the comment about, the Israelis are killing, tens of thousands of civilians, and how can you justify that, and how can you stick by a country that does that? How should we respond to that type of comment on an individual basis?
It's very hard. It's very hard. So I think the first thing is to listen and affirm to a degree. It is true. Those images, anybody who has a beating heart feels awful seeing images of Palestinian children dead and houses destroyed. How can you not? Of course we do. That's basic human. We can affirm that it's incredibly sad. And then you have to say, this is at least how I talk, say, bombing and conflict could end instantly if hostages were returned. That's one thing. You could also say, what is Israel supposed to do? What's the alternative? Every country has to defend itself, and Hamas is still shooting rockets into Israel. So I don't know what else Israel can do. Okay, maybe you don't have to use, I think you could say, maybe you don't have to use 2,000-pound bombs, okay? You could try to be more strategic, okay? You could acknowledge that, again, Israel isn't perfect, but I think it's important to say there really right now does not seem to be any alternative, because Hamas has said we will do October 7th again, anytime, and we are committed to this war continuing. So I think any other country, any other people would defend its people in the same way. Yeah, it's hard, again. You wish it wasn't the case, but okay.
I just need a clarification of something you said at the beginning about anti-Semitism in terms of one of the things of the basis of anti-Semitism. And I thought you said that Jews were followers of Jesus but did not accept him as their God. Is that what you said?
Yeah. What I meant by that is that the first followers of Jesus considered themselves Jewish. Jesus was Jewish. What Jewish meant then is sort of kind of fluid. To be Jewish was you were circumcised and you were kosher and you were part of this people. And so they believed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, and they were Jews who followed Jesus. That then, over time, becomes a different religion. When that happens, how that happens, that's unclear. But yeah, they were all Jesus was Jewish. Yeah, that's very, very accepted. Yeah. Yeah. They just believed he was the Jewish Messiah. Yeah.
Question. I don't understand why we are so ineffective in getting across our point of view. I've seen an ad from the JUF on TV that I thought was ineffective. There's so many creative, brilliant Jewish minds that could be on social media. There's the money to get the word out, and it just seems like it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, this is a big question. I get a lot. Why is the PR so bad? So I think there are a couple reasons. The image of children dying and buildings being leveled is very powerful imagery. You can't compete with that. That is, if you're trying to say, that is very emotional. It tugs at our heartstrings. And somebody who doesn't, and most people don't know. Most Americans don't know what's going on. Most Americans don't even know what Gaza is. It's true. You just do those, if you ever watch the late night shows and they do Man on the Street, people don't even know who the vice president is. Or some people don't. So most people they know much more about celebrities than they do. So seeing images is a very potent. And what Hamas and Palestinians do that's very effective PR is they really show how wicked Israel is and how damaging it is. What Jews do for PR is we try to show how great we are. And that doesn't, anybody who studies political campaigns knows that negative campaigning works. We wish it didn't, We wish it did. We wish people said, oh, he's got such a positive vision for America, and but negative campaigns work. That's how our brains work. And now there's a lot of, so I think, and I don't advocate this, but if you wanted to be more effective political campaigns, you would show pictures of buses blowing up. You would show images of bloody women who had been raped. That would tug at people's heartstrings. But first of all, I don't want to do that, but I do think that negative campaigning tends to be more effective. Now, having said all that, this is the brutal truth. Having said all that, most Americans are still pretty pro-Israel and pro-Jewish. Jews are the most admired ethnic group in America. Jews are also the top victims of hate crimes in America, but Jews it's gone back and forth. Sometimes it's from India, and other times it's Jews. So we are still have a very positive image in America. And the other thing is, this might feed that sort of Jewish power narrative, but a group like AIPAC is extraordinarily effective. I mean, this Tuesday, there's a primary in New York, Westchester County, and a seated congressman, an incumbent congressman, now remember, incumbents win like 95% of the time. An incumbent congressman is about to lose his it's basically like 37% to 17%. And in 9 out of, I think it's either 90% or 100% of the races where AIPAC has focused, it has won. So there are certain things, maybe we're not perfect in one area, but in other areas, the Jewish community is extremely effective. So that's the best I can do in answering that, yeah.
I have more questions than I could even put into words, but I have more questions I could even put into words. I think when you talk about American politics supporting Israel, it's because Israel has to survive for Jesus to come back.
For some evangelicals.
So I don't really know, once Israel survives, and then, I don't know if they truly support Israel, they'll turn around. Education is a big issue, and optics are a big issue in my mind. Even though we're talking about things that have happened in the last, 100 years, we can't even agree on what the history is.
Right.
You read some books and they say we're colonial and we pushed the Palestinians out, which really there was no Palestinians, it wasn't a nationhood. But others, it was really land that we bought, and the quote-unquote Palestinians left because they were told to leave. We can't even agree what the history is.
That's right.
So how do we teach it? And then if you really talk about racism, about anti-Semitism, it's so ingrained in us that, the people, who are already in their 20s, 30s, and you're never going to change them.
No.
And then you have to start going back, really retraining people and educating people who are in their teens, but yet we don't even want to agree that racism and slavery existed.
Right.
Or that the Holocaust existed. And then the optics of, how are we supposed to even get people on our side and say that we're not colonial when we're building in settlements in the West?
Right. It's endlessly complicated, and I think you just pointed out a lot of the complexities. Let me just say what my default is. I think we should be as open, and you don't have to whitewash history. I've read a lot of the history of 1947, 1948, the Independence War, and I have come to the conclusion, and there were many Palestinians that were forcibly removed from their land. I don't think that's much of an argument anymore. I think most Israelis accept that as the truth. I had a conversation with my mother-in-law about this who was very, very pro-Israel and incredibly bright person, very successful lawyer, and she would not believe me at all, you know. And so I think in general, it's better to be open and to say, yeah, there probably were some bad atrocities committed. And it's also true that many Arab countries said, leave, we're going to win in 3 weeks and come back. So they're both true. They're both true, and it's okay to be open about it. But here's the complication. Extremist religious settlers will never accept the truth. This is true on the Jewish side, and this is true on the Arab side. And they're very powerful politically. And so that makes being open and changing a culture very difficult. We could go on and on about this, but it's a big issue. Yeah.
So I have a question regarding what you talked about, classical Christianity, and where anti-Semitism started with that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think if Jesus were to come back and see what
And come on Sunday morning here.
and see what has been done in his name to his people.
Yeah.
What do you think he'd say?
I mean, yes, yes, Christianity, classical Christianity distorted. It is not the Christianity. It's not the message Jesus taught. Jesus didn't create a new religion. When I wrote my book about the Jewishness of Jesus, the guy who encouraged me to write it, Newt Minow, he wanted me to call it Jesus Lived and Died a Jew. My publisher thought that was a little bit too provocative of a title. Probably would have been good, actually. Probably would have been good. But anyways, yes, Jesus didn't create a new religion. Paul and then Paul's followers essentially created. So yes, I agree with you. It's a horrible. I mean, the sad truth is that for most of Jewish history, if you could choose a place to live, until the 20th century, you would choose to live in a Muslim country rather than a Christian country. There were no inquisitions in Muslim countries. There was no crusades. Jews certainly weren't equal, but it was a better life. You were less threatened. Now fortunately in some ways that Jews and Christians have reconciled, but the relationship between Jews and Muslims has just gotten so much worse. So that's the reality we live in now. Yeah.
First of all, in terms of what we see on campus, I think a lot of it is a case of liberation theology run amok, where you posit the people on top and the people on the bottom, and the people on the bottom have to be supported.
Yes.
And there's a certain amount of virtue involved in being part of that.
Yes.
It's wrong, in my opinion, to identify anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, but I don't think that's the problem that concerns me the most. It's also wrong to equate anti-Zionism with opposition to many of the things we see going on in Israel. One of the people who died on October 7th was a woman named Vivian Silver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She was the founder of Women Wage Peace. She spent much of her last days on this planet shuttling Palestinians from Gaza to Israeli hospitals.
Yeah.
We need to find a way where we can dynamically and openly stand for Israel, but also stand for the Vivian Silvers of this world. And until we do that, we lose credibility within the liberation movement, because there is a liberation theology at the heart of Judaism, I believe. It's not the one that we find in the Christian churches often, but it's something that's very, very powerful. And we're losing the ability to promulgate that beyond our own tribe. And that is a loss, in my opinion.
It's a very interesting point. You should bring that up with Rabbi Ike next time when he talks about theology, because that's an interesting, I'm not sure I agree with the idea that I've read up on liberation theology, so I think there are elements that I'm not comfortable with, but I think that's a very interesting point. And I think your article mentioning Vivian Silver is very important. Yes, she was a remarkable, remarkable person. Unfortunately, there's just I read it before I came over here. There's an article in today's New York Times that basically Israelis feel no sympathy for very little for what's happening to Gazans. And you might think, oh, that's awful. But the way they look at it is, Hamas caused this. Of course we don't want to, but there is a kind of feeling right now that we really bear no response. This is not a problem we can solve. So Vivian Silver was remarkable in that she did everything she could to solve that. But I think the modern attitude in Israel, for better or for worse, probably for worse, is all we can do is defend ourselves. We don't have a partner. And there's no, and if we try, and then they might take the Vivian Silver story and say, if you try to help, look at what happens. That's the sad, it's tragic that that's the case, but I think that's also, it's interesting. Netanyahu actually has more support among the young than the old. Which is, you would think, because in America, generally, the younger goes towards the more, in Israel, it's almost the opposite. The people that still believe, that are still sort of more of a two-state solution, pro-peace, are older. Yeah. Sherwin?
I'd be interested in your comments on the ultra-Orthodox, who seem to be driving a lot of the politics in Israel. A group of people who barely think that I'm Jewish, who don't even recognize my marriage or my bar mitzvah. How do you deal with that?
It's incredibly awful. I don't know what to do about the ultra-Orthodox. It's a huge problem in Israel. And even modern Orthodox Jews here in the United States would agree with you. You might think that the Orthodox would say, well, they're just more religious. It is a tremendous, tremendous problem. And it's only getting worse. I think part of the reason is the Israeli political system, the way it's structured, in that small minority parties can exert greater influence. So, an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, a group of rabbis, they can control 10% of the votes because their people are going to vote for what they say. So if you say, I'm going to deliver 10% of the voters to you, but you've got to do this, this, and this, any politician's going to, say what you will about Bibi Netanyahu, but he is a very savvy political operator. You can't survive as the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history if you're not savvy politically. So he's very savvy in terms of getting enough support. And so the way the system is structured, and it's really an accident of history. It's a true accident of history. David Ben-Gurion, there were about 500 ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel at its founding. That's 500. And they said, we'd like to be exempt from army service. And Ben-Gurion said, okay, you're only 500 of you. And Ben-Gurion believed that Orthodoxy would die out. He was wrong on that. He was right on a lot of things. He was totally wrong on that. So he said, okay, yeah, sure, you can exempt. Just, don't cause trouble. And it was the consequences of that are still felt today. I think the only source of hope in this is that when Ariel Sharon pulled out from Gaza in 2005, there was a group of ultra-Orthodox settlers in Gaza who resisted it, but ultimately, at the end, they left. Now there hasn't been peace. It's been now you could say, well, now they're proven they were right not to leave. Well, that's, if there truly is a possibility for peace, perhaps with enough pressure and enough force, you could pull ultra-Orthodox out of settlements that are in awful places in what would be a future Palestinian state. The likelihood of that happening keeps getting lower and lower and lower over time, but there's still a possibility for hope. I think it's a big, I worry existentially about the future of Israel. Can it exist forget, not on a military level. I'm not worried about Israel's military power. That's pretty clearly very dominant in the region. It's more of an internal existential problem. And I think that's really what's threatening. And by the way, that's consistent with Jewish history. We've often been our own worst enemies. Yeah.
Last question.
Just a fast comment to emphasize your point.
Yeah.
During World War II, we had our own Gaza in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah. No, important point.
Now, last question.
Sorry, Bob.
I do have a comment, but first I just have to tell you, as I crossed the bridge here on Clavey today, I saw the Israeli flag on the bridge and my heart just swelled. I don't know who put that large Israeli flag on the bridge, but kol hakavod. That is wonderful. I'd love to know what organization did that. In answer to something that a gentleman over there asked about the religious, it's easy for us to say the religious are the problem there, but it isn't just the religious. The ultra-right is made up of real nationalists who are mostly of Russian descent, and they are hard-nosed, and they are driving this. There are religious, I'm not defending the ultra-religious, but there are religious, Mea Sharim, B'nai Brak. They don't care. They don't get involved in this. They don't even go in the army. They don't vote or anything. It's those new religious in the settlements who are often Americans.
Yeah, that's true.
And the Russians who got out of Russia, that we helped get out of Russia, who are so far right, and they are driving this problem in Israel. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. There's a huge splintering in Israeli culture. Israel was begun as a group of truly remarkable pioneers who grew up in totalitarian Europe, in Poland and Russia, and you think about it, they were people who came from dictatorships who wanted to create a democracy. And they came from religious backgrounds but wanted to create a secular Jewish democracy. They were remarkable. And then you had Mizrahi, you had people from the Middle East who settled. And essentially, while there's a lot of racism and so forth, essentially integrated. I mean, Israel has had Sephardic presidents, not prime minister, but presidents. But Israel has also kind of, the original founding group is now not the group that has power. The number of ultra-Orthodox, because of high birth rates, is increasing. And Jews who came over from former Soviet Union, not all of whom were Jewish, which is a whole other issue, but are generally extremely right-wing. And not just in Israel, also in America, by the way. It's not all, but I remember I've done a lot of Russian Jewish weddings, and you don't want to get into a political discussion. It's fascinating. I mean, it is truly fascinating. And I think part of that is just a function of history, but it is. But I hope all of us, as a rabbi, I always like to end with a nechemta, a word of comfort. I think we can take comfort in being proud of being Jewish, knowing that we're standing up for certain things that are right, that Israel truly is a modern miracle, and that there are many people who are on our side. There are. You mentioned the flag. There are people who truly care, and we can thank and continue to hold up those voices. Yes, it's a hard time. It's like return of the repressed. If you're, no therapeutically, return of the repressed anti-Semitism is there, but it's not 1939. It's not. And we have many, many allies, and we can lift up our voices. So thank you. See you next time.
Thank you, Rabbi Moffic. If you're looking for more on Israel, you could go to our YouTube channel, Makom Salel Lakeside. There's a 6-session on Israel that Rabbi Sarada and I did, or you could just go look at all the things that we have there and review. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you. Thank you.